Hello, I'm Jane Clements and I'm the founder-director of FODIP. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how and why I founded FODIP in the first place and a bit about its history. First of all, I took a degree in theology, Christian theology, which is my faith tradition, and also some elective papers in Islam. I went to teach religious studies and I did that in secondary schools for about 16 years. And while I was there, I also had to teach some Judaism. In the 1990s, I had my midlife crisis in my 40s and decided to take a break and do an MA, which I did, and did it in Jewish studies because that was the area I had never been taught in. Towards the end of that time, I was recruited by the then Deputy Director of the Council of Christians and Jews and offered the job of Assistant Education Officer at CCJ. I leapt at the chance. Anybody who's been a teacher would know that the chance to do something other than teaching, at least for a little while, was quite appealing. So I stayed at CCJ for 11 years. I learnt an awful lot about dialogue and interfaith dialogue, and was able to develop various skills and start taking groups out to the Holy Land. In that time, it became apparent that the one issue that derailed all good interfaith conversations was Israel-Palestine. And also there was an increasing worry, and certainly within in my own thinking, that Muslims needed to be included in any discussion. I realised that it wasn't possible, certainly not for CCJ, but for other organisations as well involved in interfaith work, to actually do the dialogue on Israel-Palestine. It needed an individual space dedicated to that. And so with some trepidation, I left CCJ, gave up my salary, and decided to set up FODIP. I did so with a grant of £3,000 from a Christian charity to produce some Christian papers on the conflict. And so there was me, my laptop, in the spare bedroom, and that's how I operated for several years. While I'd been at CCJ, of course, I'd met a few individual people that I knew were good contacts, although none of them were going to give me any money. And also, though, I met somebody from the Christian Muslim Forum who was a Muslim and lived in Manchester. And he introduced me to a whole raft of people in Manchester, cross-faith traditions, and they've been absolutely brilliant. So it was me, and I ran the thing on my own. Fortunately, my experience helped me to do this. And in 2010, we had our first FODIP study tour, which was absolutely great. It was challenging, especially places like Hebron and so on, if you've been there, and going with a mixed group as well of Jews, Christians and Muslims was challenging, but it really set the scene for what I wanted to do at FODIP, which was not to avoid the difficult issues. And so we continued for a while. At that time, my husband and I were living in a flat in London, but he was made redundant. We realised we could no longer afford the service charge and decided to move out. I was keen, though, that FODIP should be not based out in which we thought Northamptonshire, Oxfordshire border, but in London. And I went round, and at that time it was getting really difficult. I had no money. I wasn't earning a salary. Applying for grants and so on was dispiriting. Got very little, and I thought I had to fold FODIP. I went round to a number of interfaith organisations I've worked with and told them we were folding. At the Three Faiths Forum, somebody I knew well said, "Well, how about if we offered you a desk?" So I had this desk at the Three Faiths Forum for almost a year. During that time, I was able to get to grips with Charity Commission regulations, and I set up FODIP as a registered charity. I had some trustees. They had to be carefully picked because I wanted to be in control, and I didn't want trustees to be telling me what to do. But I had a really good bunch of folk. Most of them were Manchester based, from the group I'd first met, and many of whom I'd taken out on that first trip. Eventually, I moved into the small back bedroom we were then living in, and then some share money that I'd had from my father's estate who died some years earlier, I used that came available to me, and I used that to set up an office in Oxford. About that time, sort of 2013-14, I was approached by the then chair of CCJ saying they needed a new director and they needed a new direction. They'd become very much the Council of Christians for Jews, and they wanted it to be a proper dialogue organisation. And would I consider going back? Well, I loved FODIP and there was so much I could do with it, but the financial struggle was huge and I had no money, and the thought of a salary was great. One of our facilitators that I had trained looked as if he was able to take over the running of FODIP, and he agreed to do so. I have to say that I paid his salary out of my own salary. He was working 1 day a week for the first few months, and then he said it was fine, that he was doing okay and not to worry, so I gratefully stepped back. Unfortunately, it didn't look as if that was the case, and he was very busy with his other job at the Three Faiths Forum, as it was then, and so FODIP really went down the drain. Lot happened, lot didn't happen at that time, including problems with filing accounts and so on. I went to the then one of the trustees that was still there and said, how about if I came back? At that point, I'd spent 2 years at CCJ as director, and I thought I turned it around with the help of some wonderful new staff members that we'd appointed. And I thought, I really want to go back to this work. It's tough work, helping Jews, Christians and Muslims to talk sensitively and positively and in an informed way about the Middle East, because that is the one issue that really derails us. And so I went back to FODIP. We had somebody who'd worked as a project manager, a wonderful young woman who agreed to carry on, and since then we have continued. We're a small outfit, we really are small. We've never had any of the big money and big funding and personal intervention that I've seen some others have, and certainly some of our organisations we work with. We've tried to hear all the voices, and sometimes, unfortunately, this has meant that we've coincided with groups that maybe on reflection we now step back from. But nonetheless, we've offered this to people, and people who've been through, participants, adults and young people who've been through our courses, who've been on our amazing study trips, have really benefited from that. Transparency in funding is important to us, as even though we've had some hiccups and some organisational hiccups, nevertheless we're a small team, very, very small team, dedicated to this process, although I do sometimes wonder why, given the angst. Meeting people, taking people out to the region is really important, and as I speak, I've just done that with a group. We had a day and a half in Jerusalem and a day and a half in Beit Jala, Beit Sahor and Bethlehem. Immensely challenging, but meeting people is the one way, and seeing for oneself on the ground what's going on. This isn't a balanced conversation, but it's important to hear all the voices. We're never going to make progress unless we hear from all the people involved. It's not an advocacy organisation, although many people who've been through our courses do find that they have a clearer vision of what they want to be doing in respect of this. I've been in this business long enough to know that once people have got an ideology in their head, it's difficult to shake. But I do believe, and experience has taught, that actually meeting people and hearing the voices does make a difference. Thank you for listening to this, and I hope you will attend perhaps one of our events, maybe even support us. Oh, some money would be lovely. But it is important, especially at the moment. There are so many people out there in the region who are struggling and who don't really know what's going on. And it does drive wedges between our communities here. So let's not be part of the problem. Let's be part of the solution.